Words Matter. Welcome everyone to the Words Matter podcast. We are recording from the Gentleman's Factory in Brooklyn. To the left of me, kind of unorthodox in a way, of the Gentleman's Factory, not the Gentleman's Factory, sorry, of Words Matter podcast. Words Matter podcast is a podcast dedicated to wordsmiths. But to the left of me, I have a jazz musician, Mtali Banda. Or Banda, how do I say?
Banda's right. Yeah.
Banda, okay. So how are you?
I'm good. All things considered, just taking in the snow, New York City in the snow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be here.
And who are you?
I feel like that's always a loaded question. I'm Mtali Banda, musician, composer, writer, educator, artist, storyteller.
I love that. And where are you from?
That's also a loaded question. I grew up, depending on who I'm with, I could either say I'm from outside of Boston, the Midwest, or Atlanta, Georgia. All those places I grew up and influenced me and influenced the person I am and the music I make.
And I was definitely going to ask if the places that you've lived and your experiences in those places shape the music that you make. But how specifically have those places shaped the music that you make?
Yeah, I think in different ways, they've allowed me to sort of see and hear and be receptive to sounds that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of me to be receptive to.
Okay.
For instance, growing up in Madison, Wisconsin, like there's definitely soundscapes that I explore that reflect that Midwestern plains and everything, almost like that. Like I listen. Most people don't know. Like I listen to a lot of Bon Iver. Bon Iver. Yeah, Bon Iver. Boniv.
Oh! I thought it was Bon Iver this entire time.
Yeah. And so I listen to a lot of him, like religiously, and he's actually from Wisconsin.
Really?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that. And so like things like that, So like when you're listening to my music, there might be that openness, but then also like that same openness is what draws me to like my Malawian heritage.
Okay.
And those sort of sounds. But then growing up in Atlanta, there's a heavy church influence, gospel influence that I was a part of, as well as being in the marching band. And so like, I don't know if you've seen like Beyonce's Homecoming.
Yes.
So like that reflected a lot of, and even in my music, you can hear aspects of that, from the percussion to the beats, to the way the bass line hits, to the syncopation. And then, moving up to Boston, it was more of a jazz city. And so that's where my education in jazz started to really be explored, and that's definitely present in all my music.
And I feel like jazz is the sound of the city. Is it like that because Boston is it's not as fast as New York, but
no.
When I think of New York and I think of music, I think of hip hop, and then second I think of jazz. So is it like that as far as Boston? Is Boston a jazz city?
It is. Boston's a weird city, but because you have Berkeley and those sort of schools, those conservatories, it brings in a huge culture from. So you go into Back Bay. You got dudes from New York, from Philly, from DC, from Texas, from all sorts that are coming to Berkeley, and so that's present there. And that influences the culture there, and in a good way, in a positive way.
Yeah.
It is a jazz city. I mean, because like I said, Berkeley and everything like that. So there's been a lot of historic jazz figures that have lived in Boston, that have spent time in Boston. And so definitely it's a jazz city, more so than a lot of places.
Yeah.
But that identity isn't the same as like other places because it's so transient. So it's like people are coming and going. So it's not like there's not a sound to Boston in the way that there's like a sound in New Orleans, and there's a sound when you go to like Texas, there's a sound when you're in DC, there's a sound when you're in New York. There's not like a sound that's I would identify with Boston per se, but the music scene's there, you know, they're doing their thing.
I interviewed somebody else. I know you're not, I guess you can't really say you're specifically from one place, but I interviewed somebody from the Midwest, and he's a rapper. And I asked him about the Midwest being a place that's in the middle of the country, so the influences come from all over the country. Was that your Midwest experience as well, musically?
For sure. Wisconsin's different because it's like there's different Midwest. There's like North Midwest, South Midwest. Wisconsin takes more from, like, when you live in Madison or Milwaukee, it feels like an extension of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
You know, so like you're getting, like, for instance, the way when you go to Connecticut, or if you were to go to certain parts of Massachusetts or Jersey or upstate New York, you're gonna meet Black people, and usually like they can trace their roots to New York. Like it's not uncommon to meet people who are like, my family's from New York,
from the city, and they moved there.
Yeah. Wisconsin's like that, like in the sense of like Madison, for instance, it wasn't uncommon for most of the Black people I knew had at least family in Chicago, moved from Chicago or Milwaukee. Same thing with Milwaukee. Milwaukee's even closer to Chicago. So there's that aspect of it. So you're getting like that culture from like Chicago, like that jazz scene, that soul, you know, blues, all that. But then there's also, you know, it's Wisconsin. It's a lot of white people. I don't necessarily know that culture though. That wasn't the Wisconsin I grew up in, so I can't speak on that sort of stuff, but I can speak on like, because it's the middle of the country. Like a lot of people, like when I was growing up, you know, it wasn't uncommon. You'd hear people listening to Talib Kweli or The Roots or Atmosphere or Jurassic 5. Like this is like early 2000s, late 90s. So like those influences was there, you know, and I think like, it wasn't like you wasn't living under a rock if you lived there. It didn't feel like that because it was a college town. Yeah. And so you're getting all these different people that are coming through. But it was interesting. It didn't feel isolated like you were saying, because it was like the center, and so you're getting people from all over, like because it's like this center town. So it's not like, you know, you might get people from the East Coast, you might get people from the West Coast who move there, you might get people from other parts of the Midwest. And so, it was interesting, but like same thing with Boston. It wasn't like there was one sound, but the sounds you're listening to are coming from everywhere. Yeah. So being around people who are into so many different kinds of music, and within those different genres of music that they're into, the different subgenres within that genre, why choose jazz? Why be a jazz musician? Especially if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? 32.
32. So you grew up 32 years old. You grew up in a time where hip hop is everything. Yeah. And you know, we didn't grow up in the 50s or 60s where Miles Davis, Charlie Bird was popping. So why jazz? Yeah,
that's an excellent question. Well, for me, so everything you're saying didn't occur to me. You know, one, I grew up, my mom was a gospel choir director. I had been influenced and exposed to that sort of music, but also both my parents listened to a lot of jazz. And so when it came time to learn an instrument, you know, for me, it was like, well, I don't want to learn oboe. I definitely don't want to learn bassoon.
I don't even know what the oboe looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to learn tuba or any of these other instruments. I wanted to learn an instrument that felt grounded in right now. And so listening to hip hop, you know, I grew up on hip hop as well. and I knew the elements of hip hop was jazz, you know? And so for me, it wasn't like, if I learned saxophone, I knew that was a window into so many different genres of music in a way that most other instruments aren't. Like, you can play sax in a rock band, you can play sax in a hip hop band, you can play sax in an R&B band, a soul band, a gospel band.
It's true. Very interchangeable.
Yeah, most instruments aren't embraced across genres the way the saxophone is. And so that was one reason why. But I did love jazz, and I love jazz. But the way I look at jazz, and this is something my parents had always instilled in me, is jazz is not simply like Charles Mingus and John Coltrane and Miles Davis, but jazz is Stevie Wonder. You know, jazz is Michael Jackson, Jackson 5. Like, those are, my parents were
Anita Baker.
Anita Baker, yeah. And so my parents were, the jazz they listened to encompassed the music I was listening to in that moment. So like, I couldn't tell the difference between necessarily jazz and necessarily like the R&B and the things like my mom was playing, like Brian McKnight, you know, those sort of things, Whitney Houston, you know. So when I was approaching jazz, that's sort of where my mindset was. It wasn't necessarily on what was being made in the past, but what was happening in the current. Unfortunately, no one told me that most of the jazz world is focused on what happened in the past. And so it's not uncommon, like, you know, people will hear my music now and what they define as jazz, they'll say my music's not jazz.
Because they're so caught up in nostalgia.
Yeah, jazz needs to fit a certain type of box. It needs to have this swing feel on the drums, like it needs to have a walking bass line. If it doesn't have those elements, then it's not jazz. And I'm just like, I mean, those people miss the point altogether. But that's a huge demographic of people that are defining what the music is.
How do you stay the course and be true to yourself while all of these jazz purists are trying to push their idea of what jazz is onto you?
That's really hard. I think I'm very fortunate. I think, and I'm really fortunate that I took the time to almost be secluded from the world. You know, I'm one of those artists who, you know, you might not hear from me for a while. You know, I might go incognito for a year, like, and not release any music and not really play out. 2 years sometimes. Honestly, like, at this point now, it's been, although I've been playing out and writing music, I haven't actually released anything real since 2017. And I think that helps. It helps that, you know, when you are thinking about who you are and not what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And when you try to hear the music you want to hear, but that is such a hard thing to do. I'm still learning how to do that in a pure way. You know, sometimes that means like,
it's a hard thing to hear the music that you want to hear.
It's actually very easy for me to hear the music I want to hear, but a part of that means I can't listen to necessarily other music. Like, I can't let other sounds pervert what I'm hearing in my head, you know, and I need to trust what I'm hearing in my head and not be like, well, what's this band doing?
Yeah.
Or what's this out? What's this guy doing? Who, he got an album out that's everybody likes to hear. What's he doing? You know, and that's what I used to do. And I think there's a usefulness to that. But at the same time, you can't let that be what guides you every single time. Because if you do that, then you're only going to be mimicking people. You're only going to be chasing people. And so I really think, like, for me, it's hearing the sounds that I hear and trusting that. Now, granted, the sounds that I hear are reflective of the music that I grew up on. You know, I listen to certain songs and I'm like, oh, that's Michael Jackson. That's Jackson 5. Oh, I'm hearing Stevie Wonder here. Oh, I'm hearing Bon Iver here.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm hearing Damien Rice, like folk music here. I'm hearing John Mayer here. Like, those things are there. But I think there's a difference between that, because those are like, well, that's already happened. I've already listened to that music. That's already coming through me. Versus like, let me listen to a whole new genre of music, hoping that my music will sound like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do that. And I think that's the worst thing you can do as a songwriter, as a musician, as a storyteller, is to let other people influence how you tell your story. Yeah.
But do you think there's a fine line between allowing people to influence how you tell your story and just being influenced?
Yeah, no, there definitely is a difference. But I think being influenced is almost like a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
Like there's music, like for instance, there's things I've written and I'm like, and I, once it's all said and done and I look back on it and I'm like, oh, that's Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh, that's when I was playing in this gospel choir. Oh, that's this, that's that. Versus let me listen to this new album that I'm really into. Let me dissect what they're doing. And then how can I mimic that? Because people do that. You know, they, and maybe there's a usefulness to that in some situations. I'm not going to say there isn't. I just think there's a problem when, you know, you get caught up on mimicking, you get caught up on like doing what everybody else is doing. And
yeah.
I hear too many artists, you know, I would say more often than not, I would say artists, musicians, composers, rappers, songwriters, they worry too much about what does everyone else like right now? And then how do they, you know, latch onto that wave? And I just think that's like, that's kind of cool. But the problem is when you do that, you make timed music.
Yeah.
You know, you make music that's like, oh, I hear it and I'm like, oh,
it'll sound dated.
I know what decade this was. I know what year this was. I know what moment you were trying to capture. And versus like an album like Michael Jackson's Off the Wall or Thriller, like there was no time.
Yeah.
They were just like, what do we feel?
Yeah.
You know, and that's why you could play that now and you're like, it still smacks like a motherfucker. Yeah.
But then is there another fine line between making music that sounds dated? Because there's always going to be a popular sound of the time, popular instrumentation of that time, popular melodies of that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that music can eventually become timeless. But then there's also music from that same time period with those same common elements, same music, same melodies that isn't timeless at all. So how do you how are you able to be current, but at the same time be timeless? Yeah.
I think there's a lot of levels to that. And now this is like me just getting in pure like music terms, for instance, like you look at something like Bruno Mars, Anderson .Paak's Silk Sonic.
Yeah.
That's pretty OG. Like there's some songs where I could literally put you next to like Smokey Robinson, put it next to certain Jackson 5 songs, like bass line, everything, melody, all that. But then at the same time, it hits right now because they're mixing it for right now.
Yeah.
You know, the drums are hitting for right now. The bass is hitting for right now. Mm-hmm. They're not, you know, it's a hip hop album. Like they mix it like a hip hop album.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that way, that album, for instance, that's an album where it meets today's standards of what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. But it also like, if it was to come out 10 years ago, and if it's to come out 10 years from now, that album would still smack. Like, because it's playing on certain things, like it's playing on the past, but then it's also like, well, how do we mix it for right now?
Yeah.
But then also there's like technology, you know, like if you listen to music from the 80s, like there was a whole lot of synth, you know, like a whole lot of synth. And even like the snare had a certain type of, like, I can tell you an 80s snare versus a 90s snare versus a 2000 snare versus a 80s, 70s snare. And so there's music where you can listen to it and it's like, oh, that's a victim to the time. Yeah. Like Eddie Murphy's single. That's a victim to the time.
Party all the time?
Yeah, you know, that's a victim to the time. You know, but like, and that's just like, I'll just play it on that. But then like, even like, there's so much music that came out there those are bops, but then you listen to it and you're like, oh, but this feels like I know when this was, and I know what moment you was chasing.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something my friend, the music director with my music, you know, that's something we talk about, is sort of like not relying on the technology. Like, for instance, like with jazz right now, there's so much like technology, Rhodes, synths, synthesizers, like saxophone players like to play with effects pedals and all that sort of stuff. And when you listen to my album from 2017, Rites of Passage, I'm doing a lot of that stuff. And because I'm doing a lot of that stuff, I feel like you can listen to the album, you could say, yeah, this nigga made this album in 2016, 2017, because that's what every jazz musician was doing. Every sax player was playing with a pedal and doing these things. And I was chasing a sound that was happening. You know, I was very conscious of that. And now when I look at it, I listen to it, and I'm not ashamed of that album. I like that album, but you know, I think about what could I have made had I not been necessarily thinking about how can I look cool for right now? How can I do what all the cool kids are doing? And the music I write right now is reflective of that. You know, I'm kind of like, you know, there is no rules right now to the music I'm writing now. And I think that has allowed it to be much purer, much truer. Yeah.
So speaking of, you know, what the cool kids are doing, how do you really, what is the, I think we understand what is considered the cool kids in hip hop. You know, what's the most played, what's the most popular song on TikTok, or what has the most Instagram engagement, or what's streaming the most. Is it the same for jazz?
Jazz is interesting because jazz, I would say popular jazz, contemporary jazz, you know, I might catch bodies for this one, but it's always behind right now. Like, jazz is always behind. Like, jazz is not ever making new shit. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some new albums that I'm like, okay, this is actually pushing something, but I would make the case more often than not, ain't nothing new. You know, they're chasing something. And so I'm saying that because, like, let me think of, like, now I'm using jazz as a broad term right now. Yeah. Like, I'm using jazz. And when I say jazz, I'm putting like PJ Morton into this category, right? So I'm not just saying like because like if I was just to say like what the dudes in like the Ivory Towers call jazz, no one's listening to that shit. Yeah. No one. And it's all white people. It's all white people with masters in jazz who teach, you know? So I don't even put that into the category because I think jazz, the elements of what jazz are is it's improvisational. It's rooted in like the Black diaspora, and it reflects the times. So like if I'm going to listen to, if you go on, and J. Cole talks about this, J. Cole went on, like, this is like in 2014, he was like, he looked up the jazz charts and he's like, I want to listen to some jazz. Every single musician in the top jazz charts was white, you know? And when you listen to them, none of them reflect Black culture. They reflect what they think is Black culture. They reflect what certain people have told them, you know, and oftentimes those people are white. So I don't put that into that category. But if I just look at like, what are the cool kids? Like, what are, like, cause there's always that jazz that people are like, oh, this is that new stuff. This is that cutting edge stuff. So like there's, you know, Robert Glasper, who was heavy on some of Kendrick Lamar's earlier stuff. And his stuff's great. I'm not going to say it's not great, but I'm also not going to sit here and say when he had his most cutting edge jazz albums, Black Radio 2, I'm not going to sit here and say that was any more sonically different per se than what had been done. Now, I think
compared to who? To whom?
Like R&B that had came out. Like he was basing, like, and I mean, that's what he's calling. He's calling it Black radio because he's saying this is what Black people listen to. So he's bringing in music soul child. And now I think that album's a little different because I think that album actually did do something a little bit different. But then what came after that, now everyone's trying to chase Black radio. Like I can't tell you how many jazz albums now, like they just, like I could play you a million albums that we call cutting edge or new, and it just sounds like Robert Glasper's Black Radio. Or there's a lot of people that are like vocalists, for instance, you'll hear, and it's like there's a certain type of sound, and it's almost like taking from like Music Soul Child, like that sort of vocal, like harmony, auto-tune-esque type stuff. So you'll hear that. Or you'll hear things that have been done just like in contemporary hip hop or R&B. And so that's just what I mean by like nothing new is necessarily being created versus like they're taking what's already been done and bringing it into the jazz world. And that's cool because we need that. But I haven't necessarily heard the jazz world create something new than that everybody else is coming on. Right now, it just feels like the jazz world is just taken from other people. Yeah.
I think that Black music over the past, since the inception of hip hop in the early 70s, and then what it became in the 80s, is a genre created from older genres. So, you know, as far as you saying that in jazz you don't see as much originality or anybody doing anything different, would you say that maybe that's just the direction that Black music is going in from now on? Just, you know, an extension of things that have already happened?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's music in general, but I think there's a way, like I'm saying this being in those rooms of musicians and having met and being in like the conversations that those jazz musicians have, where it's like you hear a song come out, an album come out, and then you go out and then you see all these other musicians literally replicate that same sound. And I think, yes, I do think that happens with all music. Like I think, you know, what's popular right now, like for instance, everybody's doing drill beats, you know, like because a couple people
in New York and Chicago and London.
Yeah. And LA too. You know, it's taken over there. Or Afro beats, right? Everybody's latching onto that because that's hot right now. And it's not to say there's nothing wrong with that, because a lot of my music is influenced by those sort of things. But I just think there's a way that you do it and how you practice it and what's your intentions, that if you're making the music that reflects who you are, you're going to take from other places, you know, if you're staying true to you. But I don't think a lot of people are staying true to them. Like, I think a lot of people are manufacturing a person that they want people to think they are. I think they're manufacturing a sound they think people want them to have. And that's tiring, you know, and it's also just not sustainable because you're just going to keep chasing and redefining your sound based on what's happening right here and then versus like really thinking about what do you have. And I'm saying that as myself because I feel like for myself, as soon as I just closed out the noise, you know, that was when I started making the truest music for myself. It was reflective, sure, of other Black music that I'd listened to, but it wasn't at the same time. It was reflective of me.
Yeah.
You know,
How do you develop this pursuit of originality?
I think a part of that is canceling out the noise, not hearing, like, I think it's very easy, even myself, for instance, I wouldn't be where I am if I listened to other people, like the sounds I'm making. Like now, you know, I'm playing sax, I'm singing, I'm doing all these different things that most jazz musicians would be like, oh, you can't do that. You're not allowed to.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just make 2 chords and then sing over that.
Yeah.
You know, you're not allowed to do that. And I'm just like, why? It sounds good. People are singing it back. You know, like you want to keep playing it. You know, those rules are bullshit. And so I think that's one thing. as well as like not needing to, I can't tell you how many times people will like, I've seen people with like a project, and while they're working on it, while they're in like production, they'll send it to other people. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
Before it's done.
Before it's done. And then they're like, oh, okay, yeah. So now the sausage ain't even done being made, and they're already asking for feedback versus like trust your process.
Yeah.
Like first trust your process, then bring other cooks into the kitchen. Maybe, maybe. But also like everyone's going to have their opinion. Everyone's subjective. That's not necessarily how I want to write my music. I think for me, it's a matter of trusting the process and then trusting who you are and what are you saying.
Yeah.
Like you should be able to know if what you're saying is good.
Mm-hmm.
You got to trust that, but too many people don't. They look for validation from other people. But yeah, I think like a part of that is really just staying true to your path and canceling out the noise and understanding like who you're going to be isn't who other people are telling you you're going to be, and these are things like I had to learn like the hard way, and I'm still learning what that means to be my truest self, my authentic self. And yeah.
How do you get young people into jazz, or is that something that you want to do?
I think I get young people. I mean, I think young people like my music. But I think that's just because I just write what I write, for me, like, and this is what I say to people, there's this, in the jazz world, it's almost like if you're a sax player, you can't be a sax player and not like this person, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get down with Coltrane. I get down with Davis. I get down with Sonny Rollins. I get down with Dexter Gordon. I get down with Duke Ellington. But at the same time, that ain't what I grew up to. Like that don't reflect my Black upbringing. At the end of the day, niggas wasn't blasting Duke Ellington. Like that just wasn't happening. Like, that just wasn't happening.
You better not dare put on no Duke Ellington. You chilling with your homies.
That's what I'm saying. Like that just wasn't happening. That's okay though. Like we need to stop making this like jazz musicians. We will never have that conversation because like for me, I'm like at the end of the day, it's Black classical music. Yeah. We gotta put that
it's true.
Classical part there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's Black classical music because I think a lot of people are like in the jazz world like to think that's where Black music started and stopped, and everything else needs to come to that. But I think for me, it's a matter of how do I get young people into my music? Well, I have elements of the music we listen to, and not because I know that's what they listen to, but that's because that's what I listen to. Like I said, for me, like I grew up listening to jazz. I grew up listening to soul. I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up listening to R&B. When I went home every day after school, I turned on 106 in Park, just like half of every other nigga across America. So those are the things I'm listening to. I could sit here and talk about the brilliance of Duke Ellington, but I could also sit here and talk about the sophistication of like Nelly, and his cadence and his melody and how he was doing all these rappers right now. Nelly was doing it before. I'm like,
for sure.
and those are things like when you listen to my songs, like I think like you were saying, like I would say like the cadences I use in my music now, like I have a song where I say like, every time I wake up, every time I close my eyes, I'm thinking about a way up, and then it go and cross my mind. And then I do like this sing-songy rap. I know it's been a year, but you're weighing on my mind, and I don't know what to say. You gave me all my dreams, and you taught me how to hope, and I hope I make you proud, but
almost
I
sound
don't
like
know
Nelly.
what to do here, still here, been here, if you here. And so those are things like I do now in my music.
Yeah.
And there's like a bunch of different stuff where like that's sort of how I get people in, but that's what I listen to. Like for me, it's like that cadence that it's like when I'm writing, in some ways I'm channeling, in some ways like I'm thinking like an MC sometimes, like in terms of rhythm. Sometimes before I even think about the melody, I'm like, all right, how do I want it to like vibe with the beat?
Yeah.
Because that matters to me. And those things help bring in the young people. But at the same time, like I don't necessarily change it. Like I stay true to who I am. And You know, it's worked so far. We'll see if it keeps working.
Yeah, you've collaborated with rappers on your project, the Oneness Project, Rites of Passage.
Yeah. Oneness, like Rites of Passage. I've had MCs on. I've also written music for MCs. You know, before I did Rites of Passage, I was actually touring with a live hip hop band.
Okay.
And I had wrote all the music for. Ironically, some of those songs were earlier versions of what would come on Rites of Passage and what comes on my music now. But that also was like, it's something I do. And like learning how to like, how do you take these concepts of jazz and translate that to musicians to play, but then also making sure that they're honoring the elements of hip hop that these people want to come in and hear, you know? Yeah. Like just almost like staying in that pocket, staying in that beat and like being okay with that. Cause telling a jazz musician to just play the same thing over and over again, man, a lot of them can't do it. Yeah. Like just play that, boom, pop. That's it. Yeah. Just do that for 8 minutes. Nothing else. You know, jazz musicians can't always do that. So learning how to like get musicians to do that, how to translate that to musicians to do that, was really a skill and a process. It's still a process now, because definitely something I think about is those elements that I grew up on. And so like when you hear my music now, not Rites of Passage, but the music I'm doing now, I tell the band, I'm like, think of it like a beat tape. You know, so yes, it's jazz, but at the same time, like I want that feel to stay true the whole time. And so like it's almost like doing what the Roots do. Like, and that's exactly what the Roots do. Like those are all jazz musicians, but they know how to lay in the pocket and just keep it there. Yeah. And that's it. You know, yeah.
Who are your inspirations?
I think that changes over time. I think there's always going to be like my big inspirations, like that will never change. You know, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Prince. I guess I got to say like, you know, Coltrane, Miles Davis.
Be safe.
Yeah, no, right. Be safe. But no, those definitely are. Someone like Miles is a big inspiration because of how he transcended time. Yeah. You know, I think that's something I'm always thinking about is, you know, Miles had, by 1965, Miles had like 4 or 5 different bands, ensembles, you know, because he knew he was searching for a new sound. And so he had to get new musicians. And so I really love that. And I love how he was constantly redefining himself. You know, his last album was a hip hop album with a DJ and all that. So that's why it's always funny when you hear jazz musicians stay caught up in a moment when the GOAT we have wasn't caught up on a moment.
I did see that, but he had some adversions towards hip hop, because I did watch the documentary on Showtime about him.
But like he didn't like hip hop.
Yeah.
But when was that interview?
It was a long time ago. It was prior to the 90s, I believe.
But I mean, was it prior to, because eventually he made a hip hop album.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that was also him just,
I think just the early days of hip hop.
Yeah.
They didn't understand it or didn't want to understand just being curmudgeonly.
And that's what you see too now with like trap music and all that, you know, and even myself, like I have to remind myself and like check myself. And because I think like there's ways like it's easy to say, oh, this isn't music. But then like you listen to it, it's like, oh no, that is like you listen to like maybe like the new R&B and a lot of people are like, it's not really music. It's like rap more. And I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of cool. You know,
and is rap not music?
No, but I mean like the melody.
Yeah, okay.
Like they're saying like R&B, like there's a lot of conversations around like male R&B artists aren't bringing it in the same way like they used to. Yeah, and I think there's some truthfulness to that because like there's not too many R&B singers who can just sing like right now, like
especially in men, for sure.
Like I'm gonna say Lucky Day.
Yeah,
I got no one else. like that can sing. Like I'm talking like that's just their voice is their instrument. Like Gavion, those guys are cool, but they not you know, they got a mixer, they got all that other stuff. I'm just talking about who can just pick up the mic and just sing. Like we don't have that anymore. But that doesn't take away from the music that's happening. You know, that doesn't take away from those people who are making the music. Yeah, I forget what was the question we was asking again.
I'm not even sure, but I want to ask you: are there any similarities between writing sheet music, and writing lyrics?
Yeah. Are there any differences or similarities?
Or what are the similarities and differences?
Yeah. So actually, I don't necessarily write sheet music anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not to say I can't do it, but oftentimes it can be a little bullshit.
Yeah.
Like there's moments like, for instance, in my earlier stuff. I think there's someone. There's moments in my earlier stuff, rites of passage, for instance, I wrote that music out, like sheet music. Like I wrote it, like for the most part, I wrote out most of the parts. I would say rites of passage I was writing out, but there's a usefulness to writing your music out. If, you know, there's intricate parts, right, that people need to learn and all those sort of things, then write the music out for sure.
Yeah.
Like that makes sense. Like, but then there's music that you don't need to write out. Like, and when I left jazz school and started playing out in the world, like, and I'm playing hard music and they're not writing out the chart to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. They're just like, listen, you know, and I think there's a usefulness to that.
I was going to ask you if there's a usefulness to that.
Yeah. And so a lot of the music I write now, I might notate like the bass line. I might notate certain things, but at the same time, it's so listen based that nowadays what I'll do is I'll actually just make MIDI files of different people's parts for them to listen to, because that's more useful than like writing it out. Yeah. So I don't really write music anymore. And I think a lot of people who do write music do it in a way that's elitist. Because there's so many times where I've played music that's written out and it doesn't need to be written out.
Yeah, you don't want to.
I just need to listen.
You don't want to have a old jazz musician here that their head might explode.
Yeah. Now I've definitely played, but don't get me wrong. Like when it comes to like doing horn parts, like things like that, then music needs to be written out. Yeah. Like those sort of things need to be written out. Like when you writing for 3, 4, 5 different horn players and they got certain melodies, like, it's
a science.
Let's write that out. That makes it easier on their lives. And for myself, like I've done gigs where it's like, it makes it easier on my life when it's written out. But then there's times where like the music I'm writing, the keys part is pretty much hit those hits, right? Then the chorus happens, we do that. I'm not going to waste my labor writing out this stuff that you can honestly just listen to in 5 minutes. You know, like it's not worth it. It's not worth that labor. So I don't really write out stuff. And then like writing out notes versus writing out like lyrics. That and that's sometimes like that might have a usefulness to it, like writing out the notes to the melody, like for the band to know, like if it's something like we need to follow. But even that is like, I don't really do that. I usually just sing the melody to them. I'll have like a version of it that they can learn and listen to. Because it is rare for vocalists to be able to sight read, you know? Like it's definitely more common for musicians, but oftentimes like you don't want to go in with a vocalist assuming they can read music like that, you know, when half of them can't.
Yeah, it's not. I remember there was a story where Prince was upset that Beyonce couldn't read music. It was like a long time ago. And she eventually learned, because she can play piano, but you know, we don't grow up in a time where people are really classically trained in that way. So
I mean, and it's not like, so like there's a way you can learn music. Like, for instance, like Prince was probably mad because Beyonce couldn't read a lick of music, right? Because there's like levels to the shit, right? There's like being able to read music and read like melodies from like your favorite pop songs, R&B songs that you do. And then there's reading music where it's like, this is high end, like reading a John Coltrane solo. Yeah. Right. Those are two different things. Like you might be able to do one, but then that one is like on another level. To be honest with you, I'm not at that hybrid level, but I can read I could read, you know, when I did, you know, I was playing horns for the Whitney Houston movie. And that it's Whitney Houston music. And
you were playing horns for the Whitney Houston movie?
Like I was in a scene where I was playing saxophone, like in the, like I was I don't want to say an extra, but I was playing the sax player in her band.
On Lifetime?
No, this movie actually comes out next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's how you just casually throw that in there like that.
Had to put it there. Had to put it there somewhere. Had to put it there. I'm getting real creative with how do I bring that information.
That's crazy.
Into every circle I'm in. But no, like when I did that, for instance, you know, they gave me music to listen to. I will say that made my life drastically easier. Mm-hmm. Like not having to hear every horn line, because like there are very, like, again, it's not hard, but it's like the little things of like, oh, that horn line's here on that ending, but that second ending around, it's not there. And so it's like good to know that. It's good to know, oh, like there's like sometimes like there's like a half note off, like that you want to just make sure you got, because like if you're playing by ear, you might not always be able to pick up those sort of things. I think everybody should be able to read. Like I think musicians should all be able to read at like that level, like at a level where you can show up to a gig, a professional gig, you know, and we all had to be able to read music. Yeah. Like now we could all play by ear, and we normally do, but this is a big gig that's paying us a lot of money.
Definitely a tool to have.
And the fact that I can read music allowed me to make $3,000 in a day versus someone else who doesn't know how to read music, you know, like it's those little things that like give you and so I think I see too many musicians though want to skip over that step. And it's such a, like, I'm not going to lie, like it's not a, like taking the time to learn to read music at an early age is so, like, I don't want to say like elementary or sound condescending, but it's such a necessary, and like it can be done. Yeah. You know, like you shouldn't avoid it, because like it will just make your quality of life as a musician so much better versus like if you don't know how to do that. And like it's not just a matter of reading music, but then do I know music theory? That's probably more important than anything else. Like my ability to know, oh, we're in this key. Okay, bet. Yeah. That chord, okay, I know that chord. I can solo over that chord, and I can also hit this chord over that, and make it sound funky and fresh and all those sort of things. Like those are things as well that like so many musicians, like, yo, like you play piano and you don't know your scales. You play guitar and you don't know your scales. Yeah. You're playing a chordal instrument and you don't know your scales. Yeah. You know how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've met guitarists who don't know their scales. You about to be a broke ass guitar player if you don't know your scales. Like I don't have a nice way of saying that, but like I can tell for myself, like I'm not playing with a guitar player that don't know his scales, because then he can't play anything I'm trying to do, because I'm telling him this is the chord it's in. Well, if you don't know that chord, if you don't know the scales, what the fuck are we doing? Yeah, just wasting each other's time. Yeah, you know. So those are like things that I think like jazz musicians have. And that's what makes learning jazz so great, because at the end of the day, I know people that play for Lil Wayne. I know people that play for Solange. I know people that play for Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole. They all got to read music. Like, yeah, Solange, like when she was playing at the MTV Music Awards and she had that whole band behind, I knew people that was in that. They was all reading music. You know, they got it. Yeah. You know, because that's gonna make it efficient. Lil Wayne's band, yeah, they read music. I know the drummer.
That's how they even got to that level to even be performing with, even though Lil Wayne probably don't know how to read music.
Yeah. And I know they know because like even like with the Whitney Houston movie, you know, plug that in one more time.
Talk your shit.
but that was what I was being subjected to was what you would be subjected to if I was in Whitney's band.
Yeah.
You know, like I was reading the charts to Whitney Houston's music. Like this is the same stuff they would have given them in 2001 if they were playing the gigs I was mirroring, you know, you're going to learn, like they're going to show this to you, and like Beyonce, you know, Homecoming, you best believe they all had that music written out, you know, and then like, you know, go and those marching bands, man, down south, I was in those marching bands. They all know how to read music.
Of course.
It's not the most complicated stuff, I will say that, but they can all read at a certain level, you know, and that's important, you know, and it's good. It's good to be able to do.
What is your favorite thing about the creative process of writing music, of making music as a whole?
Living.
Yeah, living first and then creating it.
You know, my music is so inspired by what I've been through. And sometimes that makes it hard. Can make it really hard. But and this is something I was thinking about before was, you know, like for instance, a lot of my music, it's written, like the songs are written, or I put this on my phone. This is like, you know, because I have ideas and
you got to play something?
No.
Okay.
It's just an idea that I had. And it was maybe the songs are written, but the story isn't. And I say that because there's so many times where I have like a melody. Yeah. I have the chords.
But you don't have the life yet.
I haven't had the story yet. Yeah. Like, and sometimes like I might have, like for instance, the music I'm writing about right now, all that music, it's things that have already happened per se. But then like, how am I learning? How am I perceiving those moments that have happened? That realization hasn't happened yet. Like sometimes it takes time to really reflect and sit with things and go through things. And that's like my favorite part of the songwriting process is like reading books, watching movies, like traveling, like having these experiences that inspire the songs. And then even having these experiences that make you realize what those songs are about. You know, I think there's sometimes like that's something I'm still sort of like having these realizations about is, you know, what am I writing about? Who am I writing for? You know, and that's so much fun. And then like there's that window too of like, because I'm someone where I got songs, man. At this point, I have songs that are incomplete that I started 4 years ago. And that's on purpose. Yeah. Because I believe in like, I'm not into the Bob Dylan mindset of you sit down, you start the song and you don't get up until the song's finished. I don't believe in that. Yeah. I don't. I believe in sitting on something and waiting till that perfect next melody comes and that next melody comes.
You gotta live life.
You gotta live life. And sometimes like I'll have a hook for years and then I'll travel, I'll have this experience. I'm like, oh, I have the verse now. Play that song. And like, I sit down and then it just comes to me. And those moments are like, just like magical because it's like, oh, I've been hearing this, like I have like music that like is recorded. Band, like musicians have played it and I still don't have the lyrics to it. And so I'll sit with this like professionally given instrumentals for years and I'll just play it over and over again, hoping like something will come. And then eventually something comes. And in that moment of like, oh, I've been listening to this for years over and over again. And now it's coming to me. And like, it's just so hard to explain like the rush that comes, but also like the rush that comes from like seeing something in a new light that you've been seeing over and over and over again. Cause like you think it's not going to come, you know, like you play it over and over again. Like, you might be smoking a little bit of weed and you're like, all right, let's play this beat a little back, you know, and like maybe something will come. And I'm someone who like, I can't search it. It will just come to me. And then the melody, and that's a way like you're able to get people into your music is because that's how you're able to find catchy music. is sort of just sitting there and letting it come to you. And so that's for me is like the most exciting part, is like the living, and then like that like light bulb when it comes up and you're seeing it for the first time, and then like it just flows, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, you rap, so you know what it is.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I don't rap.
You don't rap?
No.
Oh, for real? I thought you rapped.
No.
Nah? Okay.
Why do you think I rap?
I thought you just rapped. I don't know, man. I thought you had some bars in you.
Nah.
No?
That's racist.
I'm done.
Oh, man. So do you think that, because music is obviously creative, but there's a certain technicality to it,
Yeah.
specifically in, you know, the world of traditional instruments and sheet music writing, do you think that do you like the technical part of, or actually, do you think the technical part of creating music is just as creative as, you know, coming up with a song title or melodies?
Yeah, I do. Because some of that technical part is like even like the little stuff of like voicings. Like when I'm thinking of a chord and I'm like, you know, there's like a G major 7. First note's G, B, D, F sharp. But to get the most out of that chord, you don't want to just hit G, B, D, F sharp.
Yeah.
You might want to take that last note and put it underneath the first note. So now it's F sharp, G, B, D. You know, those little things that like make a huge impact, you know, like, because I'm saying technicality, well, that's involved even like when I'm thinking about the bass lines I'm writing. Like I don't simply just have a chord and then the bass line's the same note as the chord. It's like, no, my bass line might be operating on a whole different chord than what the actual chords of the music is, because that's how you're able to get like magic in your music. Or like the bass line might stay the exact same while the rest of the chords move around, but the bass line stays. Like those little things are like add so much character to your music. And when you listen to like hip hop, when you listen to things, this is what people don't realize is like, you'll understand it a lot more when you know those things.
Yeah.
Like when you know like what's happening melodically and like chordally to like a Kendrick Lamar song, because there's a lot of stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
Like that. Like what happens is like producers don't realize is that, yeah, sure, you can teach yourself keys to a degree, but that still ain't gonna teach you everything you need to know.
The
like
feeling,
you
or
need to, well, like you just need to sit down and know the theory, because once you know the theory, you can read a Thelonious Monk book, you know, and understand things. Like someone like Ninth Wonder, for instance. Yeah. He takes that time to know the theory of music. You know, someone like Quincy Jones, someone like these like the best producers will be able to like break it down. And then at the same time, you know, like for me, with my album I'm working on now, I mean, I'm gonna have strings on it. So I got to be able to write the strings parts out. I can't just be like, you know, do what y'all feel. No, because I'm hearing what I'm hearing. And so like I want to make sure I'm writing that out effectively. And so like then I got to be able to do that. And that's all fun. But I think the most fun part for me is like sitting down at the piano. Like that part is like the funnest part of like when, you know, before the band, before anything else. And it's just like, oh, I'm hearing these ideas out and I'm just literally at the piano. And what's so cool is I'm the type where I can actually hear the song, and I'm very fortunate. Like my album Rites of Passage, that played how I wanted it to play. That's exactly what I heard in my head, and we put it onto the, you know, and I'm someone where that's sort of how I am. I can hear the song, and and so like sitting at the piano is just so much fun because I'm hearing like everything where it's gonna go. Yeah, and then like, you know, you take it from there, then you bring it to the band, and then the band brings it, and it's like, oh shit, yeah, we're bringing it to life. But yeah, so that's my, like, that's also so much fun, is like just sitting at the piano and just taking those first steps, those first ideas that you have, that first story, you know, and even like singing the melody while you're playing and coming to terms with that. And yeah, that's so much fun.
So it's almost as if Yeah, it's almost as if the instrument is like an extension of your brain.
Yeah, no, for sure.
How many instruments do you play?
I play saxophone, soprano, alto, tenor.
So that's all three, right?
There's 4, but I play 3.
Okay.
Piano. And then like I can mess around a little bit with flute, but I don't want to bring that. I mean, in the jazz world, you know, there's, when you play saxophone, like if you play tenor sax, usually they're going to expect you to be able to play soprano sax. And they're also going to expect you to play flute.
Yeah.
And they'll also expect you oftentimes to play clarinet. And then if you play alto sax, it's not uncommon for them to expect you to play either soprano sax as well, or bari sax, because it's the same like keys.
Yeah.
So that's like the big one. Flute as well, or piccolo. Just because like when you're playing in big bands, like pieces will be like, it's not uncommon for like the conductor will write in like, oh, sax player, you'll also have to, this part, you'll play flute for this.
Piccolo is a woodwind instrument?
It's like a little flute.
Okay.
It's like it's a smaller version of a flute. Not so much in jazz though. You don't really see that in jazz so much. You usually just see flute in jazz.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so it's almost like, you know, when you're playing saxophone, and if you're playing at the college level, you will have to play another instrument. Like just because like the performance will ask you to do it. Like I had to learn flute just because the piece was like, oh yeah, you got to learn flute.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, bet.
Where were you educated in music?
UMass Amherst.
My alma mater as well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I didn't meet him there though. I also attended that school.
Yeah.
Just to go more into you being, because you are quite the academic.
Mm-hmm.
You have a bachelor's and you have an MA in fine arts.
No, African American studies.
In African American studies.
Yeah.
And now you're getting your PhD.
Yeah.
In
African American studies as well.
Studies as well. So how important is that to have education while pursuing your dreams as a musician?
In some ways, it's very important. I think I've used it in a way, like I've made my studies, and I've used it in a way where I made sure that I was exploring topics and ideas that fit the music I'm making. So I think it's like, I think my education and what I've been doing, it has been integral to the music I'm making right now. I don't know. You know, I have this inner fight with myself of, could I have done some of those things without being in school? Probably. Yeah. You know, I could have read those books. I could have, you know, there's definitely things I could have done. Maybe not to the degree, but I definitely think it has been good for me to explore the ways the Black diaspora and history has influenced my music and what I'm writing about. I think it's too complex not to have invested some time in education and getting a master's and a PhD in it. But I don't necessarily think that's the path for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, I think for me, there was a very specific story I'm telling that I needed to go back to school for. And I knew that. You know, I was writing about going back to my family's home in Malawi.
Yeah.
Writing about my story, my father's story, and the country's story. Well, that's an ambitious thing that it does help being in school to do, and having that time to really explore those ideas. Like you have, like, I was just given time to do that. You know, like I didn't have to make time. I didn't have to know. That was so that helped me. But I don't think that's necessary for everyone. But I think on some level it is, you know, but I think the degree that I went, like the degree, the level that
pun intended or no pun intended.
Yeah. The level that I went to do it at isn't what everyone needs to do. That was for me. That was for my journey. That was for the story that I was trying to tell. And if I didn't have to tell that story, I probably wouldn't have been in grad school. And that's just the truth.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
What are you sacrificing pursuing music while pursuing an education?
I think I sacrifice a lot of things. You know, my social life is selective. You know, like you have to be mindful of, you know, where can you invest your energies. I don't really, like, you know, even like who do I creatively collab with, all those sort of things. It's like, you know, I have to be very selective. I have to be very cognizant of those sort of things. Of like, I can't take all the gigs I want to take right now.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, I have to be real about, you know, there's a story I'm trying to tell. And I think it's pretty meaningful. I think it's one that other people will resonate with. And I think it's one where when I think about, like, I have to remind myself, like, who I am in Malawi and what, you know, the fact of the matter is, like, they know who I am over there. And so being mindful of, like I've said no to gigs and they're like, well, you're free this night. And I'm like, I get it. But like, I'm also trying to take care of myself because of this bigger thing that I'm trying to do. Yeah. And so I might be free that Friday night, but that Friday's for mental health because I'm in this songwriting process. I'm in this, it's stressful, man. It's stressful to, you know, with my music, I talk about how I write about ghosts. And so, you know, I'm putting myself, I think, I mean, a huge thing that I've sacrificed is, you know, I'm confronting things that have been really hard and certain things that I've avoided for so long. Yeah. And that shit's scary as hell, you know, to do that and then to do that in front of people. Yeah. You know, and to explicitly state, like, this is what I'm talking about. These are the things. So I think, like, part of that then becomes, like, just sacrificing, sort of little things that won't get me to where I need to be, and being understanding to myself of, like, there's a bigger goal and everything needs to fit that bigger goal. Yeah. And some things won't. And sometimes that means, like, you know.
What exactly is the bigger goal? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, the bigger goal is to get this album out, is to have a conversation that looks at sort of who we are and what's been done to us and how do we look at the past, how do we remember the past. And, you know, that's so much bigger than, when this person's like, hey, can you do this workshop? Like, can you give this time to this? We're going to pay you this amount of money. That's cool. Yeah, that's a lot of money. But that ain't going to get my album done. And that will be fleeting. You know, that will happen. That'll be a week, 2 week thing you want me to do. And I love doing those things. I love education. I love the kids. But at the same time, like, what's my big goal right now? And that's getting this done. And I think I'm in that phase now where I'm really understanding that I haven't actually given myself the priority I deserve. And I need to stop giving other people, like, I need to stop giving other people's projects more love when I don't think they're as good as mine. You know, like, you know, I'll get approached by someone and they want me to almost invest more in their project than I'm investing in mine. And I'm like, but yours isn't as good as mine. You know, and that's just how I feel. When I listen to your thing and I listen to mine, I want to keep listening to mine. And I want to stop playing yours as soon as I'm done. So why would I invest in that. And I've had to come to terms with that of like, that's okay. Like telling people, like I've, you know, a sacrifice is being looked at like a dick.
Yeah.
You know, just having people in your DMs being like, hey, can you do this? No.
Yeah.
But we'll pay you. Okay. But that's not what I'm on right now. Yeah. Like I gotta stay true to this. And sometimes that means I've lost friends. You know, I've had people I've played with and I said, you know what, you're not actually telling the story the way it's supposed to be told. And so I can't keep working with you. You know, that's something a lot of musicians have to come to terms with is, you know, not everyone's meant to be with you in every chapter. You know, you want all the homies to come, but sometimes some of them got to stay back, you know? So those are things I've sacrificed. Yeah.
Sacrifices. In an Instagram post, you said that your newest collection of music named Black Boy Fairy Tales is weaved in together with your dissertation titled Homegoing, about going to Malawi, how race and identity are not always simple, and how the past informs the present. Is intertwining your life in academia and music something that you've always had the intentions of doing?
No, not at all. But I think I was just realizing, you know, with my music, there's so much thought that goes into it. You know, when I think of Rites of Passage, for instance, when I look at Rites of Passage, well, that album, it's a coming of age story. And, you know, I'm exploring ideas of mental health and all those sort of things. Like, that's sort of what I'm, like, those were what those songs represent. It represents like me coming to terms with like, oh, I'm not good. Yeah. Maybe I haven't been good for a while and I got to come to terms with those things. And that's sort of what that whole album is like, sort of trying to talk about in a way that I felt like Black men, we couldn't really talk about. And so when that album came out, that was done, but I knew this story wasn't done. You know, it's almost like a sequel in a sense, where Rites of Passage is telling my whole story, like from start to finish. Like, it talks about my childhood, it talks about all these different things. Homegoing, and then even like that last song in Rites of Passage, Umodzi, is about when I went to Malawi and sort of got that clarity. Well, Homegoing is a microscope into what happened in Malawi. Yeah. But then also then, and so I knew that, you know, I knew going in, the next project was about this trips to Malawi. And I knew because I was already having the songs written. As soon as Rites of Passage was done, before it even came out, I already had this album done. I already had the songs done. I already had the story done. But I knew there was a way that I wanted to talk about the story. And it was a story of like, when I went back to Malawi and I was telling my father, I'm not doing well. And I haven't been doing well for a while. And so going back to Malawi, and it, you know, I feel like the most cliche thing I can say, but it's the truth, is it was a movie. You know, like on some real shit, you know, you're going back as a 24-year-old male, you know, telling your dad, hey, I'm depressed. And I'm depressed because of things that happened because of you and your drinking and the demons and the ghosts you were trying to escape. And now I got my own ghosts, you know, from your ghosts, you know. And, you know, his response was, let's go to Malawi. And I went to Malawi, and to go there and to learn about the history that my family was a part of, to learn what my dad was subjugated to as a Black man, as a 2-time refugee. Like, it was a movie. It was a movie where I could relate myself, you know, because at the same time I'm learning about things that might happen to my dad. We're the same age. Like, I'm the same age going back to Malawi, 24, and he was 24 when those things were happening. Yeah. And so I realized that it was bigger than simply, it wasn't simply just my story, you know, and it wasn't simply just things that had happened to me, but it was also a bigger story of what happened in Malawi and how did that impact my family.
Is that where the Rites of Passage part comes from?
No, that's where the homegoing part comes. Yes. Yeah. It's sort of like that idea of going home, and you've never been home before, but it's home. And so you're going. And so Black Boy Fairy Tales is that play on where those stories are first my perspective. You know, I can tell that part first. I still don't feel comfortable talking about necessarily my dad's story in detail yet, as well as like the country of Malawi, but which is like what Homegoing is exploring. But Black Boy Fairy Tales is that idea of like, here's this place. And I think like I take on, you know, in Black Panther, like Killmonger, you know, he's talking about how his dad would tell him about Wakanda. And he like turns to T'Challa as he's about to die. And he's like, you know, can you believe that? You know, little kid from the hood believing in fairy tales. And I kind of ran with that because for me, that's what Malawi was. It was this place where, you know, we didn't have money. And so I never saw myself being able to go to Malawi. I never saw that being a reality. Like it was always like, it will happen. But when will it happen? And so even me going there that first time it was only a do or die type of situation. It was we're going only because like my dad sees no other hope. And just being there felt like a fairy tale. And so I have this song called Black Boy Fairy Tales, which is the original thing. And then I just titled everything. That is like this idea of like, I didn't know I could go there. You know, I didn't know I could be there, you know? And so to be existing in that, it feels like a fairy tale when I go back there and the things and the people I get to meet and, you know, like it's a movie, you know? But yeah.
What does Africa mean to you?
Man. You know, I could say Africa means home to me, but that's like cheesy.
I guess it's kind of broad. It's a continent.
Yeah. But but it means a lot to me because like even now, like I just moved here and I'm working in Harlem. And I didn't realize Harlem was as African as it was. Harlem's pretty African.
Oh, you mean like the African stores and stuff like that? Or?
Well, I just mean the people who live in Harlem, like a lot of first generation, like my students, like the majority of them are African, like first generation, like the African, like how I am African.
In the Bronx and Harlem is a lot of African first generation kids.
Yeah. That's what I'm realizing. And I knew a little bit of the Bronx because I had some homies, African homies who were from the Bronx. So they got me hip to that. But I'm saying that because like it gives me comfort. You know, I'll be like walking in Harlem and like I'll go to an African cafe and like I feel so at ease to just befriend the owners. Yeah. And like joke around with them. And like the school I work in, the security guards are all African and like first day I got there, I knew I could go to them.
Your uncles.
Yeah. And like they embraced me. And that's sort of what Africa means to me. And in some ways too, it's cool because like I didn't realize how much like going back and doing music was so cool is like, cause like for me, I mean, Malawi, I call myself Malawian because Malawians call me Malawian. And I say that as like someone who went back and was out here in these streets playing with the biggest names. And those people, when they found out, you know, sometimes Africans can be exclusive, you know, like if you don't speak the language, if you wasn't born there, they'll be like, you ain't with us. Yeah. But for me,
tribal, I
never had that, you know, and I think a huge part of that is because how I play the saxophone. And they would tell me that they'd be like, you know, we hear home in you. And so, yeah, like there's just like Africa resembles home to me. It resembles this place that just exists in me and that I'm able to channel and be in. And I know, you know, like just when I'm around Africans, like there's just a feeling of comfort that, I can't explain.
Yeah. Speaking, going back to your album, the Oneness Project, Rites of Passage, that came out in 2017. What's taking so long for you to release new music?
Man, I feel like Frank Ocean right now.
Or Rihanna.
Yeah. So originally it was money.
Yeah.
But then I realized, but to be honest with you, the silver linings was I'm so glad that I didn't have it when I when I thought I was ready.
You
Because
got the money.
half my songs wasn't ready, and now they are, you know. And there's a story, like, it's hard to explain to people, but I mean, it will be coming out this year because now I have those resources, I have the managers, I have the backing and those sort of things to make it happen. But I needed to go through a whole lot of things before I could feel comfortable, and now I feel that, and it feels so good. Like I'm hyped to, like, I feel like I have something to say, and I feel like the songs are now complete. Whereas before it felt half empty, you know? And I think a lot of that is the lyrical content.
Yeah.
You know, I have songs now that are just like, yeah, like, and they're deep, you know, they're powerful, you know? So yeah, I think, that's sort of what took time. I needed to, like, almost like, I had all these experiences since Rites of Passage happened. I lived in Mississippi, California, went to grad school, you know, broke up with a girl, got in another relationship, broke up with that, you know, like all these different things that happen that influence like the songwriting process and like allow you to approach it. That I think everything's happening on time.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it wasn't, but now I can say, like, with certainty, like, I'm sitting on something now that I feel like is done.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it didn't feel that way. Yeah.
I always wanted to know this about jazz, because you know, a lot of these songs don't have hooks, so usually you learn the title of a song from the hook. In jazz, you see a song title, and you don't see that title expressed in the music. So how do you even develop those titles?
Yeah, it's sort of different. Well, with me, oftentimes, because some of my music has lyrics, and so in that sense, those songs, the title comes. Yeah, you know.
But for the ones that don't have words,
for the ones that don't have words, it's almost like it just comes to me. Like there's just a place that I'm at where
a feeling.
Yeah, a feeling of what inspired this song. Where am I writing it from? Like what moment in my life is this song replicating? Yeah.
What speaks louder, instrumentation or lyrics?
I think both. I think for me, like, what makes my lyrics so great is how I craft the instrumentation and the chords.
Yeah.
And so I can't pick one or the other. But the lyrics do matter. You know, like with me,
words
at least.
Matter.
Exactly. But I definitely am thinking, like, I put time into my lyrics. I'm not one of these people who has a lot of lyrics, but the lyrics I have make sense. And there's a strategic way in how I word it and how I place it and how I do those things. So I think they both matter. Yeah. Yeah.
And in conclusion, why do words matter to you?
You know, I think words matter to me because, you know, so often when I play and there'll be someone who wants to introduce the band and he asks all these details or she asks all these details that she can say. And I look at him and I say, just say, it's Mtali Banda, and that's it.
Yeah.
I'll introduce me, because no one can tell my story better than me.
Yeah.
Right. You want to know what I'm about. You want to know what my music represents so you can introduce that to the audience, and you're going to fuck it up. And then the audience is going to have this perception of me that isn't actually true based off of the story you told that's inaccurate.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, you know, and I say that because, you know, I grew up in places where, you know, people had a narrative. You know, you look up Brockton, Massachusetts, and, you know, you look up, oh, it's top 10 poorest city in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
One of the poorest in the Northeast. So it must be this, this, and this. let alone the fact that it's produced, Hollywood actors. Every year someone's going to Harvard, Yale, Brown, Princeton, all these things that exist there. But because other people are telling the story, there's a stigma. And I feel that way about, I remember working with youth in California, and I was doing arts integration, and we was going through Oxnard, which was majority Mexican migrant, middle class, lower middle class, working class.
That's where Anderson .Paak is from.
He lived there, yeah. And I also was in Ventura too. They're right next to each other. And we would go through these communities, and at the end of the day, like, we were asking, what did they see? And they was giving us bullshit answers, these high schoolers. And I looked at them, because all these kids was coming from like Sacramento, the Bronx, Jersey, Mississippi, everywhere, DC, LA. And I just remember, and they was all coming from places where people got a narrative. They wasn't coming from the nice parts of Sacramento. They wasn't coming from the nice parts of the Bronx. They wasn't coming from the nice parts of like Jersey. They were coming from places where like people have a story to tell about them. And oftentimes the people who are telling that story ain't the people who are from there. And, I remember sitting there and telling them, I said, hey, no one's going to tell your story better than you, but also when we do tell other people's story, how are we going to do that? And remember the fact that you come from a place that no one tells the story accurately. And so think about that when you're telling someone else's story. Think about that when you're telling your story, is that it matters. Is, the way you word it, the emotions you put in, the heart you put into it, matters, because someone's going to leave, and that's going to be sometimes their only take on where you're talking about. Like when I'm talking about Malawi, when I'm going up on that stage singing about Malawi, when else is someone going to be out here talking about Malawi other than when it's talking about Malawi is the poorest country in the world? Like my music is going to be the only time someone's hearing about Malawi and it's not about poverty. And that's just the truth. There's no other time you will see Malawi in the news on anything, even when it's like the boy who harnessed the wind. That's about a broke ass nigga like trying to make windmills. But that's just the facts. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the facts. And it's like, we got to do better, because that's not simply all Malawi is. And so for me, it's like, telling your story is like, for me being a black man, there's a perception they have of us, and, I like to go on that stage and sing these beautiful songs and cry and these heartfelt things of like, we do that too. We can do those things too. This is our story. And so that's why I think words matters, because no one else will tell the story better than how you're going to tell it.
Great note to end it on.
Really, thank you.
So everybody, words matter. Here with Mtali Banda. Great interview. Just great interview. Speaking about his upbringing and his story and all the things that make him who he is. And I really appreciate you coming here, man. Thank you very much.
Bro. I appreciate it. This was nice.
Man. Words matter.